guess this was born out of basically a hangover, and I spent my 20s in the flats, and I ended up in some of you will understand this, in a similar room like this, but they're usually in church basements. And so I had some extra money because I wasn't drinking anymore, and I went out and I bought a mountain bike, and I fell in love with it. And that was in the spring of 2004, and then I spent that summer just basically riding my bike and trying to get back in touch with who I was, and straightening my life out. And Thanksgiving weekend came, and it was nasty, and it was rainy, and nobody was riding their bikes anymore. And so I decided, well, maybe I'll go out and have a couple beers. That didn't work out too well. But in that hangover, I thought to myself, I'm like, why couldn't you do this indoors? And there had been like some indoor skateboard parks that had been around. One was here, it was on the west side of town. And it was mainly designed, it was like babysitting with ramps. You could drop your kids off there and they would ride their skateboards around. So I'm like, I'm 37 years old at the time. I'm like, well, why couldn't we do this mountain bike thing on an adult level? If I could find a big enough building, maybe it would work. So I started making models. If it did anything, it helped to keep my mind in someplace else besides going back down to the flats. So this was in '96. I tried a bunch of different, I would look in the newspaper and find a space, and I'd try not to waste anybody's time, but I would go and I'd go see a space, and the guy would be like, nah, we want a regular tenant. We don't want a mountain bike park in this building. We want a stamping plant, or we want a warehouse or something. So nobody was real receptive to the idea. And I guess the fast forward is July in 2004. I'd been good all those years, and I was over at an old friend's house. It was kind of like a original version of kind of like a Tony Soprano type. Really good guy, like an older, big, Italian guy, was like a father figure to me, and always told it to me straight. So we were sitting there, and he's getting older, and we were discussing things that he wished he would have done with his life. And he shared some things with me, and he's like, well, how about you? He's like, you're still a young guy. And I said, I got this idea about this indoor mountain bike park. And I'm like, I can see it. And here this guy who's 65 years old, who hasn't been on a bicycle since probably the 1950s, he's like, I think that's a great idea. I think you should do it. So the next day, I hadn't thought about it in years. So the next day I stopped and I bought a paper. And I saw the first ad in there. It said, clean space, low rent. And it was Susie's phone number. And the sign is still out there. It's still the same sign. So I call a number on Monday morning, and I said, before I waste anybody's time, I'd like to see what kind of space you got. And they go, well, you want to talk to Susie. So I'm thinking, oh man, Susie is not going to get this. So Susie gets on the phone, and she's like, what do you want to do? I've heard them all. So I said, I got this idea for this indoor mountain bike park. And I hear this silence, and she says, I've never heard that one before. So she goes, I want you to come down here today and have lunch with me. I got the perfect space for you. So I'm like, okay. So I come down here for lunch. I meet Susie. She shows me a space over here first. And then we end up over here. And this was somebody else's space. And we walk through that door. And she says, she slides that door open. She's fighting with that door. And then it was a beautiful July day, and the sun is blasting in these windows. It was almost like a Bible car where the sun's blasting down. And she goes, this is where you should build it. And I'm like, wow. And it's this huge, vast open space. It's this huge, vast open space, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot. lot. So she's like, I've never negotiated a lease or anything before. So she's like, well, why don't you go home and think about it, phone me up, let it sink in. So a few days go by and I go home and I'm like, okay, what's the limit on this credit card and this credit card and this credit card? And I'm like, is the bank gonna loan me any money on this thing? And so I get any money I can get my hands on, plus, my entire life savings. And I figure out, well, I can probably build this much for this, and I think it'll be enough. And I just got real creative, and I had a remodeling background my entire life, so that kind of came natural. Then I had friends who were in the trade, so if I needed help with some electrical issues or whatever, I was able to call on those guys. And it was a real grassroots kind of an effort from the very beginning. So, Susie included. So I go to Susie and I'm like, all right, Susie, here's what I'm going to need to get the place livable, and I can't afford to pay your rent. So she said, well, get it, let's try it, see if it works. And she gave me the first year's rent free. And she said, if it doesn't work, then just sweep up and leave it a little better than you found it, and we'll part friends. So I'm really standing here because of Susie. And she believed, and she said, I saw the energy in you or something. And I look back and the whole thing is like a blackout. Because I'm like, it was so stressful, So this ended up being the first indoor mountain bike park in the world. And